Hello, outside world. Welcome to our event. Welcome on behalf of the Doctoral College at DMU and on behalf of Leicester Centre for Creative Writing. My name is Simon Perril, and I'm just going to briefly introduce the event, really. So we have 4 speakers, and we've left a little bit of time at the end potentially for questions, though we all know that digital gremlins each eat this kind of time, so we'll just see how we go with that. As I'm sure you all know by now also, there is a chat function, so do post thoughts or comments and potential questions, and if there's time we will try and pick them up later. The theme for this session is creative writing and discovery and practice research, and each speaker has got a different take on this topic. And we're thinking particularly about the creative writing PhD. Okay, so knowledge and making an original contribution to it are very much seen as fundamental to PhD work. And all of the speakers this evening have in common the fact that they're using creative writing itself as a vehicle for exploring and discovering something. So that means basically that they're using the writing of fiction or poetry or memoir, to use the forms that we're dealing with this evening, to examine something. And the unique value of practice research is that it doesn't present a readership with an argument like traditional scholarship. First and foremost, it gives them an experience. So readers or audiences are, they actually feel immersed in the concerns the writing is setting in motion. And so the ideas are being played out as story, as image, as situation, as character. And as we know, all cultures have used story and poetry and performance to know the world around them differently and to make sense of lived experience. So discovery seems like a particularly useful concept to peg this event around, and it's something that has different connotations, connotations that are very relevant for practice research, where the creative act in whatever form, whatever genre, actually drives the project. So one definition that the Oxford English Dictionary gives of discovery is that it involves some sense of revelation. It's something which is discovered, something that is revealed, something that's brought to light, and brought to light or found for the first time. So you can see how this idea of for the first time contains this sense of an original contribution to knowledge. But this idea of bringing something into the light also allows us a sense that the act of writing attends to something that's perhaps not been considered before in quite the same way. So what we're saying is that this writing is a different kind of knowing. But there's another, I think, more obscure definition of discovery that's preserved in the OED that I particularly like. It suggests that discovery is the action of uncovering something. And the example that's given from 1658 is of the opening up of a bud. And I think this more organic sense of discovery, that is a slow flowering, if you like, makes particular sense for creative writing PhDs. A further sense of discovery particularly suits the work of my centre colleague, Nicola Valentine. It's a definition that likens discovery to the evidence through which something is revealed or demonstrated. Now, Nikki is a really accomplished novelist, and she's currently undertaking a PhD by publication. So this means that she's retrospectively discovering threads that are running through this impressive body of work. And as we shall hear, she's got a very strong sense of her writing demonstrating, revealing, providing evidence of the brutality of living in late capitalism. Rosie Georgiou is going to talk about her PhD in progress. Again, her chosen form is central to her content. She's reclaiming the form of Chiclet and exploring how fiction might have an agitatory role to play in empowering women. She's going to tell us about discoveries she's been making in the course of this first year of her research. And I should also gently warn you that she will briefly but sensitively also mention domestic violence. Carolyn Butterwick is also going to talk about her PhD in progress. She's writing a memoir that challenges stereotypes about visual impairment and mental health. She's very interested in how the lived experience of supposed disability is so often about managing the obstacles, physical and mental, presented by society. And she'll talk about how this discovery of Oulipo, a group of experimental writers dedicated to using playful constraints to generate new writing. So thinking about Oulipo has allowed her to experiment with artificial constraints in ways that parallel her lived experience of the barriers she faces in everyday life. But firstly, we have my centre colleague, poet Joanne Dixon. Jo is going to talk about her experience of undertaking a creative writing poetry PhD, and will explain to us how discovery through the idea of epiphany is an essential methodology in practice research. So without any further waffle from me, let me hand over to Jo now. Enjoy the trip, folks. See you on the other side.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to begin with a poem that opens my creative PhD thesis in Epiphany Contemporary British Women's Poetry, which I completed a year or so ago. This poem also appears alongside other poems written during my PhD and is published in my debut poetry collection, Pearl. Skegness Wake. Graffiti on the carcass shouts, "Man's fault." But the woman next to me isn't so sure. A burgundy membrane drapes from its insides, and a chainsaw settles in the sand. Where we toy with a flapping cordon, study squid scars on a box-shaped head, the amputated jawbone, and conical teeth. She quizzes the pathologist, leaning on his 4x4, a clipboard jammed against his hip, green chest waders up to his armpits. He can't answer yet, and walks into the sea. Salt water rinses the blood spatter from his face, and a Jack Russell sniffs at fluids pooling beneath the flukes. An oily odour is binding to the fibres of the gloves I post later in the bin by Terry's Fish and Chips. They say there are two more at Gibraltar Point, so I join the column drawn there and back, calves burning in the backslide of the shingle. This is a poem of there and back, a poem that in Margaret Atwood's words describes a negotiation with the dead. Atwood suggests that the writing process involves crossing thresholds into other or underworlds. Referring to Rilke's sonnets to Orpheus, she tells us such a journey is a precondition of being a poet, a journey that also describes my creative writing practice research. On the 25th of January 2016, I decided to travel to Skegness, where 3 sperm whales had been stranded on the beach. I could have been sitting at my desk writing or reading, but instead I found myself veering into another world. Researcher Charlotte Doyle explains how creative people actively construct conditions that allow creative works to happen. She adds that the designated writing places were not just places, they were occasions for a particular way of being. In such a place, a writer is highly conscious, even self-conscious, of her process. It is purposeful, intentioned, and reflexive. For me, constructing particular ways of being became a productive method amongst several in my creative writing practice research. On Skegness Beach, I was in an unfamiliar and unsettling world. Atwood explains how after being in such spaces, It is important to bring something back from your journey. It's useless treasure, she says, unless it can be brought back and allowed to enter time once more, which means to the realm of the audience, the realm of the readers. Poet Stanley Kunitz suggests something similar when he describes poetry as a way of finding out what it feels like to be alive. However, he recognises a difficulty for the poet. These moments are fugitive, Kunitz says, and it is somewhat of a paradox that poets should spend a lifetime hunting for the magic that will make the moments stay. Returning from Skegness, I was faced with this same difficulty. How could I make the moments stay? The image of the pathologist waist deep in the North Sea, washing the whale's blood from his face, lingered and provided me with what Doyle refers to as a seed incident. Explaining the importance of such moments, she says, psychologists have suggested that the creative process is a kind of problem solving. For the authors in this study, a seed incident provided the problem to be explored. I too had a problem to explore, how to translate the fugitive moment into poetic utterance. Often such moments of insight or personal transformation are associated with the term epiphany. The Oxford English Dictionary defines epiphany as a manifestation or appearance of some divine or superhuman being. However, in a secular context, epiphany has come to mean any moment of great or sudden revelation, and has been absorbed into modern consciousness as a moment when new knowledge or understanding is attained. But more precisely, the definition of epiphany is derived from its Greek origin, epiphaneia, meaning an appearing or manifestation. If we look closer at the prefix epi, meaning on or fitting, we find that epiphany is means fitting manifestation. Sandra Humpel-Johnson describes how literary epiphanies, ones that appear on the page, encompassed at least two areas of epiphanic experience: the moment of epiphany in nature, as perceived by the creative artists, us, and the moment epiphany is recreated by the word. Skegness Wake became the translation of the moment of epiphany in nature into a creative work. The fitting manifestation on the beach was, recalling Atwood's words, brought back into the realm of the audience, the realm of the readers in the form of the poem. This then is the paradox at the heart of writing epiphany, and the paradox that lay at the foundation of my creative writing practice research during my PhD. How can epiphanies be presented on the page? My research question was addressed through both creative and critical practice. In other words, through my own creative writing, through the poetry of other writers, and through the work of scholars of literary studies writing about epiphany as a poetic device. Inspired by Kroll and Harper's important book, Research Methods in Creative Writing, I adopted Jerry Kroll's suggestion that creative writing can be rhizomatic. Kroll derives the idea of a rhizomic approach from the writings of philosophers Deleuze and Guattari. Deleuze and Guattari offer an alternative philosophy on ways of knowing and thinking. They suggest the rhizome, defined in the dictionary as a prostrate or subterranean root-like system, is significant for its structure, particularly for its multiple non-hierarchical entrance and exit points. Crucially, they say, any point of a rhizome can be connected to anything other and must be. Rather than viewing the creative and critical elements of my creative writing practice research as a hierarchical relationship, such as that is represented by perhaps the root structure of a tree, I took a rhizomic approach, privileging neither the creative nor the critical as a way of knowing. As a consequence, epiphany became both the content and the tool of my PhD journey. I practiced making rhizomes, growing offshoots, writing poems through constructing particular ways of being, like my journey to Skegness, and then putting these epiphanies in nature into conversation with the different epiphanic modes I was discovering in contemporary and historical texts, both creative and critical. Thus, my creative writing practice research developed new ways of understanding and writing epiphany. I was contributing to new knowledge. I'm going to conclude with another poem. This poem introduced the creative work in my thesis. It's called Meshwork, and it connects epiphany with the voices of speakers in poems by Alice Oswald, Kathleen Jamie, and Liz Berry, 3 poets who became important presences in my practice research. Their voices impinge on my poem as borrowed lines from their poetry collection. The poem reflects the way that epiphanies or fitting manifestations encroach on our consciousnesses, and it embodies some of my thinking on epiphany. The citations for the lines are presented in the right-hand margin, adjacent to the borrowed lines. They draw attention to the strands of epiphany present in the work of these 3 women poets, while also providing a link to my poems in relation to the question of this creative writing practice research: how can epiphany be presented on the page? Meshwork. I pick one, keep it in my pocket, a puckered brown half oval of seed shapes pushing at the leathery case. It's a November morning, and I have been lured away. Outside, beyond the garden, where the ground slopes down past the broom poking at my legs, and all its pods swerved by the wind the same way. The sand underfoot is almost firm enough. My cells are loosening and yielding. A parcel of oyster catchers, white stripes on black wings, reaches the strand first, drops to probe for mussels and cockles, where summer spades engineered forts, a line of 4, one stooping, one bending, one down on his knees, the youngest trying to scrape the sand into a wall, goading the tide together. Waves doubling back on the other side. Shades on the surface shifting with the clouds, deep grey, blue, sky. Where the oyster catcher's wings, jimmicking in the breeze, arrange more strands in the air, unseen. I drift about, seeking shape in the shoreline, the wind amplifying in my hood, the clouds sinking to meet the sea, hiding something behind. Imagine chasing just one strand, or the imperceptible growth of a shell, flesh pink and cream arcs asclent in the water. I pick one up, keep it in my pocket, back in the garden, away from the edges, no change at all. Then I hear the contours of a blackbird tilting his head towards the soil, listening for worms. Orpheus, lingering on, singing still. In his throat, I bump into myself there in the darkness, where he opens his beak, telling me what he thinks. See the words and the ink. The brown half oval ripped, twisted, it wouldn't snap. Black seeds on the page. The flesh pink and cream shell faded, scratches visible, peeling like skin inside, letting the pieces fall. Until I felt it at last, his whole hand gripping my thumb, deposited by a current of air. Thank you very much, everybody. And now I'd like to introduce you to my wonderful colleague and novelist, Nicola Valentine.
Hi, so as she said, my name's Nicola Valentine, but I write actually as Nicola Monaghan and Nikki Valentine. And today I'm going to talk about creative writing as research and the way this happens in both a knowing and unknowing way. And this will actually talk about some similar things actually to what Jo has talked about. But I also wanted to talk about how the unknowing stuff engages with your subconscious and how this is a really powerful way of researching. Because I think sometimes your conscious mind puts a lot of structure on and things, and actually because you know what you're trying to find out, that can actually prevent you from finding out some more interesting things that you weren't aware of. So I'm studying for a PhD by published works, and that's quite nice because it means I've already done most of my research, because actually it's based on novels that I've already written. So the main thing I'm doing now is reevaluating my body of work and writing about it. So when I first started this, I was really looking for a vehicle for my for this work. I wanted to write a creative piece in an ideal world, but for various practical reasons, I realised that that wasn't going to really work out. And so I decided to take a different approach, and this was writing some new creative work that's slightly separate from the PhD and really explores what it means to me to be a writer. So researching my writing process and how that is research in a more knowing way, but also reevaluating my previous work and its concerns. And these are 3 of the novels that I've been looking at. As soon as I started to look at my previous work, it became clear that there were some real kind of themes coming out of that and some real concerns that I had as a writer. Lots of deep and buried imagery to do with capitalism as a crime scene and critiquing neoliberalism. So The Killing Jar, my first novel, is all about drug dealers, but these drug dealers really kind of embrace entrepreneurship, and you could almost imagine them on Dragon's Den. That's how they approach things. They see their work as a business. Whereas when I wrote Starfishing, that was more of a critique from the heart of the beast. This was a book that was set in the city about a working class woman working as a trader in the city. So it was a bit more of a direct critique. By the time I wrote Dead Flowers, because I was doing an MA in crime fiction and I was writing about the same kind of similar critiques in recent British and Irish fiction, I was a bit more aware of it. So I did start to write about these things in a bit more of a knowing way. But again, this book makes that parallel between businessmen and gangsters. And it also critiques urban regeneration and gentrification. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things I discovered when I looked at my writing that was set in the heart of the beast, where I actually used to work. I used to work in the City of London and I used to work with traders. So this is my most direct critique, although perhaps my deepest critique of capitalism comes when you compare my first novel and my second novel, and you realise that the lives of these traders and these drug dealers and their morals and their outlook are not that different from each other. This picture that you see here, it's a picture from the Chicago Board of Trade, which is a similar trading floor to the one my book set on. And this is basically a picture of a crash happening. So I've written about how it feels to be on a trading floor during a crash. I'm just going to read you a little bit about that. The room smells of bodies and fear and instinct. It smells of animals hunting and being hunted. A bell rings and it all stops. The screens and the walls are splattered red with all the numbers that have gone down, 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 like it's been sprayed with blood from a slaughter, from the hunt. You feel blooded too, can almost smell the iron of it, feel it smeared across your face. The floor is littered with debris. You walk, watching your feet as they crunch through abandoned trade cards. They remind you of autumn. They remind you of betting slips at the races. So obviously you can see some of that on this picture. When prices go down, they turn red. So, you know, literally that was just amazing for my imagery, a bit of a gift for my imagery. But you can see also, I think, from the piece that I've just read to you, this sense of capitalism as a crime scene, which comes through in my writing. With the same book, and this was really revelationary for me, with the same book I had a scene right at the end, which is really kind of very metaphorical about my journey through capitalism and my ultimate rejection of a life within that heart of it all. I didn't realise any of this when I wrote it, but looking back, it was so obvious. I had a character called Tom, who's very cocky, overconfident, amoral, kind of slightly dangerous person, I suppose. And he really did, for me now, as I reread, represent the capitalism itself and the trading floor and the place where I worked. And my other character in this book, Frankie, my other main character, she's having an affair with him. And now that just really feels like a huge metaphor for the fling that I myself had with capitalism when I was working in this kind of place. So they've got a very hedonistic and unhealthy relationship. I'm going to read you a key scene, and it's from right at the end of the book. So there are some spoilers. I do apologise. Frankie and Tom, they're on a trip to Chicago. They're staying in these massive skyscrapers towards the top of them in a hotel room. And Tom has climbed to the outside of the balcony. He's holding on to Frankie's hands and he's basically daring her to let go. So this is what happens next. Bear with me, I've lost my sheet of paper. Sorry. He says to her, "You don't got the balls, baby. You don't got the balls to have me, and you don't got the balls to let me go." He was smiling, so sure of himself, the way he always was. The anger that came was sudden and intense. I could feel my pulse moving my throat. I looked into his eyes. "You're wrong," I said, and I let go. So yeah, as I said, that feels like me kind of like throwing capitalism over the balcony, or at least wanting to, in a way that I wasn't aware of when I wrote it. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I've also started work on a new creative piece that specifically engages with what it means to me to be a writer. As I revisited my old work, I realized that a lot of what I write verges on autofiction. So it's not autobiography, but it does have autobiographical themes, and actually it uses a lot of autobiography in a kind of metaphorical way. So it's something I'm exploring overtly with my current work in progress, which is a literary novel based on some of my very first writing from when I lived in Paris. So I'm exploring it in a knowing way now through a character who lives in Paris, who works in finance but wants to be a writer. So this actually couldn't be much more autobiographical than my own situation when I was living in Paris and when I was first writing. So I'm going to read you another little scene. This is where the character starts to write, and she's sitting in this beautiful square that you can see here. It's called Place Stravinsky in Paris near the Pompidou Centre. And this is really pretty much based on what happened. She stares at the pool and the brightly coloured sculptures, at the Parisians as they come and go. You can say you want to be a writer as much as you like, but you have to do something about it in the end, don't you? You have to actually write. As she sits there with the notebooks, Leanne wonders if she actually wants to write. Perhaps it's a bit like living in Paris, something that's better in a wish than in reality. There is only one way to find out. Leanne stares into space and lets her thoughts wander for a while. She orders more coffee and eventually a sandwich too. She smiles at the children playing. She doodles and daydreams and lets the world happen around her and lets herself relax until she almost disappears. At some point, she can't even say exactly when, she begins to write. She writes about things that have happened to her for now, as she doesn't know where else to start. She focuses on creating scenes on the page from her real life, simple things, a candle in Notre Dame, a trip on a boat and a wish. And actually, the trip on the boat and the wish is where this novel starts, so I'm kind of referencing this story within itself, which has been quite fun to do. Yeah. I do quite like grey areas, and I do want in this book for the reader to be wondering how much is autobiography and how much is fiction, and just to have that kind of slightly postmodern-y stuff going on. So right at the end, I have my character returning to Paris as a novelist to promote a book called Flyboats, which is the name of the book that I'm writing. But this is again a metaphor really for something that kind of happened to me, in that I returned to Paris through my writing, through revisiting that writing from the time that I lived there. She finds her city and her own feelings about being a writer really change. So you can see here Notre Dame in all its glory from the river. It doesn't look like that at the moment because it burned down. And actually, weirdly, one of the first things that I ever wrote was about lighting a candle in Notre Dame. And all through this text, it keeps referring to that, about don't leave a candle unattended. And that was just there in my text when I came back to it. So I just kind of quite liked that and found it quite fun. I'm going to read you a bit to close that reflects on what fiction or autofiction is, or at least how it is for me, and some of the things that I've been thinking about as I've revisited all this. And this kind of plays a little bit on what Dubrovsky said about autofiction, that it was like a dream. A dream's not life, a book is not life. So this has kind of come into this scene in a bit more of a kind of overt way. Her time as a Paris resident is so long ago now, it feels like a dream. This is what Leanne says as she tours with her latest book, which is set in the city. She also says that it's not quite a true story, but it's not quite a lie either. It exists in a reality of its own, where very slightly different things happened. People often laugh at that statement, although she's not quite sure why. Gordon always said he wasn't sure why people found Leanne funny, but that it was something to do with the way she told a story. He was onto something there. He had turned up, of course, at one of her readings in London. She'd been expecting it. She wasn't sure why. And when she saw him sitting there, the sense of recognition was so strong, it felt like they'd never broken up and he was there to take her home. He'd found her after the Q&A and asked lots of his own questions about parts of her story. We never split up in Paris, he said. We split up later, a lot later. He paused for breath. We never got back together like this, he said. He jabbed a finger into his copy of the book as if accusing it of something. This isn't true, he complained. Leanne had smiled. It's fiction, she told him. It's not supposed to be true. Then she thought about it and told him it held a different type of truth, the way that dreams do. So that's me done. Just a quick rush through my references there, and I will hand on now to one of our PhD students, Caroline Butterwick, who is going to talk about her work. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So my name is Caroline Butterwick. I'm in the first year of my PhD at DMU, and my PhD is on memoir as counter-narrative, using creative non-fiction to explore visual impairment and mental illness and challenge dominant models of disability. So the presentation I'm going to do today is talking about the idea of Oulipo and other experimental techniques as ways of knowing, linking to DMU's research theme of equality and social justice. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to this topic, and then I'm going to give a reading from a creative piece I've been working on. So the Oulipo movement was a group of writers in the second half of the 20th century who used what they called restrained writing techniques to create new work. And this is the idea that by placing restrictions on your work, it can help you create new and innovative ways to write. And part of my research has involved reading the Olympian author Georges Perrec's book, An Attempt at Exhausting a Place in Paris. And in this short work, Perric writes about everything he observes as he sits in cafes in Paris over the course of 3 days, creating exhaustive lists of description. And then separately to my interest in Oulipo, I've also been exploring the idea of psychogeography and how we relate to built environments, especially from a disability perspective. So through this, I'm looking at this from my perspective as a visually impaired person. So the way I navigate public space is shaped by the physical environment, but also how others respond to me as a disabled person and how I feel myself being perceived. So as Simon mentioned at the start of today, creative writing as a form of practice research is well placed to position the reader into the experience. And I feel this is something that's particularly relevant for tackling themes of equality and social justice that my PhD is exploring. So experimental techniques like the Olympian exhaustive lists that Perric uses can be used as ways of knowing. And I wanted through my work to experiment with how this exhaustive list effect could be used to show the embodied experience of disability. And so in the creative piece I'm going to read now, I was interested in using this exhaustive list technique to show the sense of exhaustion of navigating space as a disabled person. So this following short creative piece draws on these ideas of psychogeography and Perric's exhaustive list technique to show how I navigate a city centre and the barriers experienced as a disabled person. So this piece is called A Walk Through Stoke-on-Trent City Centre. The bus station, much criticised by the readers of the Sentinel newspaper, who preferred the crumbling, reeking one across the road because they are not fond of change, is busy today. I prefer this bus station. It's covered for one thing and has toilets and an information desk and other hallmarks of 21st century modernity, though I find the greyness of it a bit much. There are crowds spilling out from the waiting bays, blocking the way. I'm clutching my white guide cane. But the people are mostly too absorbed in staring out, hoping the 101 to Stafford appears soon, as if glaring hard at the forecourt is enough to will it into existence. The mess of people and the sleek dark grey colours in here, combined with dim but somehow harsh fluorescent lights, means I'm constantly calculating where next to step, how to simply get from one side of the building to the other. Eventually I'm out of here, into the light of the large paved area outside the bus station. I pick up my speed a little. I blink away the sunlight, the glare that hits me. There is the sound and bite of wind. Hanley is on top of a hill, and there are certain streets where the wind whips you, where you must push against it. There is the sound of people talking and laughing, snatches of conversation carried in the air. I haven't seen you around here in months. And how is she doing? The doctor said. There is the smell of exhaust and of the billowing steam from the Albion pub on the corner that always smells of cheap, delicious chips. I've lived here 10 years, and I still haven't had their chips. There are steps that are completely unmarked that I've tripped down before, steps that blend into the dark grey paving. I've mapped them in my mind, so I know not to veer to the left. I wonder how many people have fallen on them. Perhaps I should tell the council. This paved area is new, for when the bus station opened a few years back, so there's no excuse for the danger of being old. I guess access goes against their aesthetic. It's less busy now, but I'm a few paces from the entrance to a bus station, and I'm in the general flow of people heading to the shops. There are others, though, heading my way, swinging carrier bags as I return to the bus. Some dodge awkwardly when they spot my cane. Others I must dodge awkwardly. Two tides, those arriving, those leaving. Two tides that must slip and blend. Sometimes, as I walk this part of the journey, a memory is summoned. Of my depression days, unemployed, lonely, catching the bus into Hanley because there was nothing else to do, hoping that being near people, wandering the city, would bring me some comfort. It's not a good memory. It tugs on my stomach, reminds me of a version of myself I am saddened by. Some days, too broke to get a coffee, too tired to window shop clothes I couldn't afford, too cold and bored already, I would go into the big Wilko on the corner and buy a 50p bottle of Pepsi Max. Then, exhausted already after just 10 minutes in town, I'd get the next bus home. I would loiter back if I saw it's the same bus as the one I'd got here, waiting in its bay for the return journey. It would seem weird, even suspicious, to go on it, to return so quick. How would I explain it? That I rode the 4A bus for 45 minutes to Hanley just for a 10-minute trip to go to Wilko and spend 50p on a bottle of Pepsi Max? That being on a bus, my earphones in, the city slipping by the window, was better than sitting at home, my head too empty to do anything, my thoughts broken, but my skull still an endlessly ticking clock. The feel of time passing slowly in my head, the way nothing could reach me. How could I explain that? It's painful when this memory hits me as I walk out the bus station and see the red of Wilko up ahead. As I walk my route to the shopping centre, there are trip hazards and obstacles everywhere. An A-board advertising mobile phone repairs. Unmarked curbs that are especially a problem on the street that takes me from the square outside Wilko and the Albion, past Mr. Sim's old sweet shop and a beauty salon that advertises leg waxing and eyelash tinting. I trip on this curb when dodging the group of men walking three abreast straight towards me, who ignore my cane. I think they snigger as I stumble. Grey benches with poor contrast. Uneven paving, missing paving, paving that tree roots are trying to upturn. People, on their own, in groups, in pairs, some oblivious, some quick to move on the sighting of my cane. A bicycle chained to a tree, its wheel sticking out into the street. A black bin bag spilling out red Costa cups and green and blue crisp packets. Pigeons bobbing haphazardly or flying fearlessly fast and low. On more than one occasion, I feel the alarming beat of air as they swoop inches past my head. A man in astonishing red, shouting, "Hey sweetheart, you want to save money on your energy bill?" My white cane gives me permission to walk straight ahead, not engage. "Fine, be that way," I hear him mutter. This is not the first time. A tree, an A-board for £5 ear piercing. A busker with a guitar playing Losing My Religion by R.E.M. with reasonable results. I hear him before I see him and nearly trip on his open guitar case. I would quite like to give him some change, but that would involve stopping in the street and finding my purse, and I would become an obstacle, and maybe a target. I keep walking. An A-board, but I can't read. A woman in a red jacket suddenly steps in my path. She apologises for making me jolt and stumble before trying to hand me a voucher for money off at McDonald's. I politely decline and keep walking. More uneven paving. A man dressed as Mickey Mouse, waving, jigging up ahead. I shift my direction slightly so I'm out of his dancing way. He is here daily and I question his motives. The sun is suddenly in my eyes. Everything is whitewashed, an overexposed pixelated photo. I shield my eyes with my free hand. Someone bashes into me. They don't apologise, nor do I. Everyone around me is moving fast, funneling up the slope to enter the shopping centre. I can see so little with the sun so bright, but I know if I were to slow my speed, I would get in the way. I'd be more likely to bash into people, so I keep going at the speed of the crowd. I could call it blind faith, walking forwards like this, the mental map of the journey, my guide. There are things you learn when you must navigate space differently. When you regularly traverse the landscape, you learn its details, its feel, the people that walk there too, each crisscrossing the city, the supposedly shared space, in our own ways. We weave ourselves through these places, each footstep on concrete, asphalt, grass, imprinting us onto the city and the city into our minds. Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass over to Rosie.
Hi. Hello. I'm just going to open up my PowerPoint. Okay, so my name is Rosie Georgiou, and I'm a creative writing PhD student at DMU in my first year. Today I'm talking to you about living in a digital society and storytelling as a means of agitating awareness. Before I begin, I do want to flag that I will be touching on the subject of domestic abuse very briefly and very gently, but I thought it was important to talk about that before I do start. When the time comes in the presentation, I will flag it again. And if you would like to duck out for a couple of minutes, that is absolutely fine. So my research, meet me at the intersection. My research sits at the intersection between fourth wave feminism, the Chiclet genre, and more recently, the impact of COVID-19. The thing that they all have in common, the thing that makes these factors so interesting, is that they engage so deeply with the feminine experience. You'll notice that I've put the word feminine in inverted commas because it can be a controversial term and it's something that is widely debated. I will come back to that later, but that is the thing that ties all of these strands together. And that leads me nicely on to COVID, if anything can. So some research that I've done that is important to my creative writing practice. The impact of COVID-19, but specifically on women. Women are suffering disproportionately compared with their male counterparts due to the impact of the pandemic. Since the coronavirus pandemic, women have been reported to be more likely to be furloughed and spend more time on unpaid housework and childcare, have higher levels of anxiety, depression, and loneliness than men. The next slide talks about domestic abuse. So if that is something that you don't want to hear about, that is completely fine. You are welcome to come back later. So, research on domestic abuse and its relationship with COVID-19. I was surprised to find that there was a rise as high as 65% in the increase in calls to domestic abuse helplines in the first lockdown of last year. And in the reports by the Office of National Statistics, it's been found that women are significantly more likely to be victims of each type of abuse, even though, of course, this report talks about abuse of all genders. So to kind of put a finer point on that, that's approximately 7 in 100 women and 4 in 100 men. And that statistic comes to the end of March 2020. It was widely reported at the time as well. A hand signal was being shared and it was called the signal for help. And that's the one that's in the small infographic at the bottom of the slide. So it was raising the hand, tucking the thumb in and then covering the thumb. Because there was a worldwide crisis on 2 levels. There were instances of more violence at home, as well as the problems with the virus spreading in the wider world. And the thing that was interesting, that's the wrong word. The thing that was important and influential and significant about this gesture was that it didn't leave a digital trace. So if anybody that was asking for help could do so without there being necessarily a trace of a soundbite or a word on the internet. With that said, we're also experiencing the 4th wave of feminism in a digital age. And this is something that we've been anticipating as early as 2003. It started to gain traction in 2008, but really peaked in 2017 when feminism was the most searched for term online. The key tenets or facets of this movement are that it is queer, sex positive, trans inclusive, body positive, and digitally driven. In lots of ways, it is a social media movement, and social media activism is one of the driving forces. Content is created for, disseminated by, and driven by social media. Professor Sophie Harmon, who was writing for The Independent, reported that because women bear the brunt of lockdowns, as we've just seen, although very briefly, lockdowns become a feminist issue. And that is where these two seemingly different times, movements, perhaps they've got different agendas, that's where they intersect. And that has a significant influence on my research. So where does this lead from a creative writing perspective? I've chosen a genre that has been branded froth, trash, a disgrace to feminism. The difficulty with delivering online is that I have to laugh at all my own jokes. So Chiclet is the genre written by women, about women, for women, and yet it's been branded a betrayal of feminism and its call for equality. The Chiclet genre has been criticised for its lack of introspection, the shallow, superficial presentations of women and females, feminine characters. Ultimately, the question that is behind all of this is if women are writing unashamedly about clothes, shopping, drinking to excess, and sex, how far have we truly come? And that is really one of the biggest criticisms of the genre. There is, however, somebody, a thinker, critic, theorist, Imelda Whelan, that argues that Chiclet is in fact a product of third wave feminism, and ultimately what Whelan argues is that it's a product of third wave feminism, which is a much quieter form of feminism. It's an anxious genre, and the 1990s has a post-feminist culture where the second wave of feminism has left behind all of this freedom, which makes it hard to navigate the modern world because all of the rules and the logic of gender roles of the past have been swept away. So how do you conduct yourself in a situation like that? And we find ourselves in a similar situation today where we're faced with this global crisis, this pandemic, and we're asking questions about what's the priority of my life? How do I behave? How do I navigate the world? I will come back to that point in a minute. I've got slightly ahead of myself. However, Whelan doesn't say that Chiclet is a genre without problems. She does point out that the heroine cast is white, straight, reasonably well off and able to fit into a size 12 or 14 dress. And that is the every woman, except the every woman doesn't represent the every woman. So in Chiclet, the female identity becomes reduced to this young, urban, white middle-class obsession with three things that I've found so far. And they are heteronormative romance, body image, and consumerism. And of course, this idea of heteronormativity, the interest in body image ties in very neatly with the key concerns of fourth wave feminism. So paradoxically, bizarrely, there's actually a very happy marriage between the three. And we come back then to where you'll find me, which is Chiclet with an X at the minute. This is an emerging draft in the spirit of discovery. I'm sharing something with you that is very much in the early stages. I hope you enjoy it. I am going to be reading on screen, so please excuse my scanning eyes. And at the moment, this doesn't have a name, but the beginning of the chapter is Monday, the 23rd of March. Sleep, 8 hours. Hello, working from home. Water, 2 litres. Meditation, 8 minutes. Steps, 10,000. Affirmations. I am healthy. I am wealthy. I am a flowing Botticelli. I am thick. I love my rolls and dimples and jiggles. I love me. 5:30 a.m. London, my flat. Yes, the early bird catches the worm, as the old saying goes. Up with the best of them. I've been reading old Covey's 7 Habits. I am up and ready to take on the world. Done my morning meditations while gazing into my own eyes in the mirror. Bit creepy, but whatevs. I'm going to be a go-getter. This lockdown won't get the best of me. No, thank you. I'm going to use this time to self-optimize. No morning commute means an extra 45 minutes each way, 90 minutes a day. Imagine what I could do with that time. I could start painting, writing motivational posters and sticking them up when I go out on my daily walk. Must schedule that on Teams, actually. Out of office 11 till 12 for daily walk. We'll let Terry know. Could go viral on Instagram. Might post a daily selfie. Hashtag locked down, but chin is up. Hashtag plus size outfit of the day. Not sure. Might need to mull it over. There's a world of possibility out there. Well, figuratively speaking. 5:45. Shit. I've just seen the time. Never going to be successful if I keep sitting around like this all day. Quickly write a list of stuff to get done before work this morning. To do. Shower. Hair. Use heated rollers for bouncy hair vibe. Makeup, but no makeup look. Read 10 more pages of 7 Habits. 10 minutes of yoga. 10 minutes of journaling, but technically doing this. Breakfast. Granola with yogurt. Finish scrawling list. We'll quickly boil the kettle to make new green tea before showering. Should we upgrade to a Brita filter kettle? Think filtered water is probably healthier, especially for green tea. Must look into it. Then shower and hair. 7:45 a.m. Literally nothing left to do. Hair and makeup done. Tried yoga after. Why does nobody talk about how awkward downward dog is? Think it was probably more awkward because did it naked and Billy's new boyfriend walked past on his way to the toilet. Just don't want to wear yucky lycra on my freshly washed skin. Will def do yoga before shower tomorrow. Wearing a fresh new pink suit jacket that I ordered off ASOS so I feel professional. Have checked camera angle and lighting. Moved plants into shot and Billy's filthy socks out of it. Had granola and yogurt for breakfast. Will wait for 9 a.m. Desperately want a coffee but think caffeine is bad for my sleep schedule. And I've started off so well. 9 a.m. Was first person to ask about the commute to work this morning. 10 points to me, 0 points to Trev. Teams is on fire. So many chats going off. So exciting to be working from home. Everyone is using odd simulated backdrops. Phyllis has a beach scene and James is in an old-fashioned library. Was hoping to have a nose in their living rooms. Should I admit to that? Oh well. 9:30 a.m. Pretty exhausted, to be honest. I've sent 3 emails and finished my tea. Already been up for 4 hours while these part-timers have been sleeping the day away. Hope this new routine gets easier. Seen a great recipe for banana bread to try this evening. Thank you so much for listening. If there has been anything on the presentation that has been difficult to listen to, then please do make use of the resources that are on the PowerPoint. I can see that you can't see my screen. Sorry about that. So Women's Aid and Rise UK have some really useful information. And for anybody that wanted access to any of the references, they are listed here and I can ask for them to be disseminated. With that said, can I please call back Simon, Nikki, Jo and Caroline for a panel discussion?
Thanks, everyone. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that. So really good indication of the kind of diversity of work that's being done within the centre, and also the kind of diversity of conceptions of what a creative writing PhD is. I think that's really one of the exciting aspects of practice research across the board, isn't it, really? Hearing everybody talk, I just wondered, we've got a few minutes. We've not had explicit questions from the chat. There's some nice comments. I wondered what each of you think about an aspect of discovery that's been kind of bubbling really under the surface of everyone's presentation, which is the role of surprise in practice research. I don't know if any of you want to say something about the ways in which you have encountered surprise in your respective work.
I can start if you like. Well, as I mentioned in the presentation, just rereading stuff that I wrote sort of getting on for 20 years ago, actually, was really quite illuminating in terms of things that I didn't know that I was very concerned about, and metaphor that I didn't realise that I was putting there, which, and it's not that it, you know, it's not this kind of, you kind of, sometimes writers talk about, you know, when sort of literature gets hold of a book and puts things in it that's not there. It's not that. This is stuff that is there and that is really clear to me now, and clearly things that I was working through at the time. So for me, doing the PhD by published works and looking back at stuff that I've written over a significant time period, there is massive surprises waiting there for me, of things that I didn't know about myself, or things that I didn't know that I was thinking or working out through the creativity.
That's really helpful, Nikki, and you're making a really kind of subtle distinction between, you know, things, you know, being unconsciously there or whatever, or actually what a lot of people writing about practice research have described as expert intuition. You know, you've been writing for a number of years, and actually the writing becomes a different way of thinking, doesn't it? So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. Okay, and anybody else want to talk about surprise?
Yes, I will, Simon. So I found that when I was working on epiphany, epiphany is obviously sort of often conceived as a single moment, an instant in time. And as I looked much more closely into epiphany and into the works, I found that it isn't a single moment. And so to me, the element of surprise isn't that it's a single moment of surprise. It's not a sudden light bulb or really sudden just one instance. It's much more of an ongoing process that is also, in terms of constructing ways of being as well and creating ways of being, is that there is some conscious ways and methods to surprise yourself, and that it's an ongoing process, and it isn't just one moment, it's a series of moments that lead me to a discovery rather than just one. So I looked very much at how epiphany could be non-teleological. So it's not a single moment of understanding at the end, you know, that suddenly comes to you, and that there is it's much more of a process, I suppose. So I find it difficult balancing surprise and how I actually work.
But I think that's really interesting, Joe, and I think it actually, in some respects, it connects to kind of Caroline and Oulipo, doesn't it? I think in the sense that actually what writers do, and I think we all do this to greater and lesser extents. And you spoke about the need to turn writing into an occasion, and the flip side of that, the need to make occasions for writing. And I guess Oulipo is just one of a more overt sense of what it means to trick yourself into working. You know, so Oulipo, you know, they've kind of devised strategies. So even if you don't feel inspired, and it's one of the things they're trying to demystify, is exactly kind of ideas of inspiration, isn't it? There are techniques, there are restraints and constraints that you can use to make yourself work. And you know, I think that's a really healthy attitude towards a writing practice.
And I think that's something I found with my element of surprise, what I found was doing the kind of PEREX exhaustive list, is it really made me think about the barriers I come across as a disabled person, and how, to me, that I almost take them for granted. And so by doing that exhaustive list of that journey, it really made me realise, actually, this is stuff other people don't realise. And this is a really good way of showing that embodied experience of what it's like to navigate through space as a disabled person. The things that kind of I take for granted in my experience, other people don't realise. And so using that restricted technique was really helpful for that, and for generating those ideas and sharing that side of things.
And I think it also brings the event full circle, doesn't it? Because where I started was exactly kind of arguing that what creative practice does is it makes you feel and experience those concerns. It doesn't just level an argument about them. So, you know, your passage is about exhausting us, isn't it? And I guess that being the case, I'm sure we're all pretty exhausted now, but very grateful for everybody's contributions, and very grateful for you know, there being an audience out there making nice comments, etc., etc. So you know, on behalf of Leicester Centre for Creative Writing and the Doctoral College at De Montfort University, hope you've enjoyed yourself, hope you've discovered lots, hope you'll continue to join us in future events. And I hope you have a nice tea as well. Thanks, everybody.